Welcome to Warp into War, your ultimate guide to Warhammer.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of our Explainer. It's with a heavy heart, but honestly also with immense respect and celebration, that we're focusing today's session on a true titan of our hobby. We are looking at the life, the unbelievable art, and the enduring legacy of the late great John Blanche. Because let's be real, if you've ever rolled a handful of dice in the 41st millennium or navigated the chaotic, grimy shadows of the old world, you have walked directly through the imagination of this extraordinary man. Hello and welcome to Warp into War. Recently, the artist John Blanche passed away, and we are dedicating today's explainer to him. We're going to unpack exactly how one illustrator's completely unique, uncompromising vision took a burgeoning tabletop gaming company and gave it the visual soul that still captivates millions of us today. So, who exactly was the man behind the myth? John Blanche, who lived from 1948 to 2026, was a highly influential British illustrator, an incredible model builder, and, of course, an art director. But honestly, looking beyond the formal titles, he was the chief architect who created and totally defined the dark, visceral visual style of Warhammer. He was born into a working-class family in post-war England, and he grew up in a world he later described as just gray and flat. And he totally rebelled against that grayness. He actually started out drawing historic warriors on the backs of old rolls of wallpaper. He'd eventually go on to win the Master Painter Award at the UK Games Day in 1987 and ultimately became the visionary who gave us the absolute visual essence of what we all now call grimdark. Okay, let's dive into this, because to truly understand Blanche's impact, we really have to look at what was happening in the industry around him at the time. In the 1970s, fantasy art was largely characterized by clean, tidy, and, let's face it, pretty predictable cliches. The heroes were spotless, the monsters were super straightforward. Blanche's vision was the exact opposite of all that. It was dark, it was gothic, highly dangerous, and just this bizarre, awesome punk rebellion. He literally took inspiration from classical masters like Rembrandt, Bosch, and Dürer, and collided them head-on with the raw, chaotic energy of punk haircuts, studded leather, and heavy metal culture. So why did this deeply unconventional style absolutely rule Games Workshop's evolving tabletop systems? Well, it really comes down to three main pillars: a heavy metal rebellion against established norms, a deep historical gravitas, and a direct protest against genre cliches. You see, his artwork wasn't just there to sit quietly as background decoration. No, it was designed to be a punch in the gut. It was filled with dirt, real danger, and a bloody drama that completely broke the rules of traditional fantasy art. It challenged the viewer and the player to step into a much, much more treacherous world. And that actually brings us right to that second pillar, historical gravitas. Blanche had this incredible, entirely unique talent for weaving real human history. We're talking medieval knights, monastic robes, Napoleonic uniforms, into this extreme, far-future dystopian sci-fi setting. By grounding the unbelievable extremes of the Warhammer 40,000 universe in actual historical aesthetics, he gave the fiction a serious, truly believable weight. It didn't just feel like a pulpy, disposable sci-fi comic. It felt like a heavy, decaying, terrifyingly real universe rooted in the absolute darkest parts of humanity's past. He also wasn't afraid to use his art to challenge the industry itself. He famously stated, "I was utterly sick of seeing brilliant artists producing painting after painting of near-naked fantasy females with chests the size of airships." And that frustration directly led to famous works like his Amazonia Gothic piece. That artwork was a literal protest against the unrealistic, exploitative fantasy art that was everywhere at the time. He didn't want to spoon-feed audiences with glossy pinups. Instead, his goal was to create fierce, terrifying, and deeply mysterious characters that commanded respect and left massive room for the player's own imagination to run wild. All of this culminated in the visual birth of a concept we now just take totally for granted: grimdark. Now, while his colleague Alan Merritt might have originally coined the phrase the grim darkness, it was John Blanche who provided the perfect emotionally charged visual translation of that whole concept. Think about it. Before this era, tabletop games were often just these sterile board games where you moved simple pieces across a grid. Blanche's art transformed them into rich, deep, terrifying universes. He gave the games a soul totally characterized by decay, mystery, and ancient forgotten technology. Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because his professional journey is simply incredible. Way back in 1977, he was a freelance illustrator, churning out iconic covers for White Dwarf magazine and those early Dungeons & Dragons UK editions. Fast forward a bit to 1986, he moves to Nottingham, and boom, he is officially named art director. And he continued to tirelessly shape the universe for decades until his retirement in May 2023, sadly passing away just a few years later in June 2026 at the age of 77. It is an amazing journey from a passionate freelancer drawing in his spare time to becoming the absolute visual visionary of a massive global company. But how exactly did he get those keys to the kingdom? Well, it really comes down to the Brian Ansell connection. Blanche's formal path to becoming art director was deeply rooted in the personal networks of the early hobby industry. He shared this massive passion for collecting miniature figures with Brian Ansell, who was the boss of Citadel Miniatures. They both lived in Nottingham, and Blanche was always popping into Ansell's early shops. That shared, intense hobbyist passion forged a genuine friendship that quite literally changed the trajectory of the tabletop industry forever. So, in 1986, when Games Workshop expanded and moved all its operations to Nottingham, Ansell officially handed Blanche those keys to the kingdom. He was appointed art director, which gave him the immense power to not only lead the internal art department, but crucially to commission external masterpieces. He basically had the mandate to fully steer the visual identity of Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 for the next few decades. He brought in other absolute legends like Ian Miller and Adrian Smith, guiding them to build upon that dark Gothic foundation he had personally laid down. And wow, what a magnificent foundation it was. Let's look at some of the truly defining artworks of an era. We are talking about pieces that didn't just decorate rulebooks, they define the entire tone of the hobby. You've got The Emperor Sits Upon His Golden Throne in 1987, the ferocious Blood Angel facing off against an overwhelming orc force in 1993, the iconic Adepta Sororitas in 1997, and the grim, stoic resolve of the Black Templars in 1998. Literally every single one of these releases acted like a cultural reset for the players. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer emotional weight of this specific 1987 classic. It just cannot be overstated. For so many of us, The Emperor Sits Upon His Golden Throne is the ultimate iconic representation of Warhammer 40,000. I mean, it shows the corpse emperor, decaying yet completely divine, kept artificially alive deep within the bowels of the Imperial Palace. By using his painstaking techniques of layered inks and acrylics, Blanche perfectly encapsulated everything he was trying to say. The massive sacrifice, the Gothic horror, the archaic technology, and just the overwhelming, suffocating despair of the Imperium. It's a masterpiece that set the permanent visual rules for the entire universe. But remember, Blanche's art wasn't just hiding out in the background lore. It was actively driving the mainstream. His sweeping, incredibly intricate masterpieces served as the legendary box covers for major releases like Battlefleet Gothic, as well as the second and third editions of Warhammer 40,000. For millions of new players walking into a hobby store for the first time, a John Blanche painting was their dramatic, super welcoming gateway into the hobby. It was the bold, unmistakable face of the franchise that told you immediately, hey, this is definitely not your standard clean-cut sci-fi. The universe that John helped create is this massive, dark, and uniquely beautiful place, and his unmistakably punk, historical lens is exactly how so many of us came to fall in love with it. What you should really take away from this explainer is that without John Blanche, the grim darkness of the far future might have looked very, very different. That is, if it even survived at all. He leaves behind an artistic powerhouse of a legacy that's for sure going to echo for generations. So I want to leave you with this to think about. Do you have a favorite John Blanche artwork? How did his unique vision shape your own imagination? We remember John Blanche, 1948 to 2026. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep exploring the art that makes our worlds real.